From Second Stage Theater, see the new play from the writer NPR calls one of the hottest playwrights in America, with Kate Bornstein, Josh Charles, Ty Defoe, Armie Hammer, and Paul Schneider. See Straight White Men on Broadway for 10 weeks only. Visit 2st.com.
The Anglo-Zulu Wars was a clash between the might of the British Empire with the African Zulu Kingdom in 1879. This podcast will discuss how Sir Henry Bartle Frere was appointed High Commissioner for South Africa, tasked with a mission to bring the various African kingdoms, tribal areas and Boer Republics under British rule. You'll hear how he issued an ultimatum to the Zulu King Cetshwayo on the 11th December 1878. When demands proved impossible to comply with, war was declared, incredibly, all without the backing of the British government. We discuss battles such as the stunning Zulu victory at Isandlwana and the near collapse of the garrison at Rorke. But at the end, the British triumphed. The Zulu Nation was no longer independent, but part of the British Empire. By 1870, the British Empire had colonies scattered across South Africa, sharing borders with various African kingdoms, tribal states throughout the region. They were surrounded by Boer settlements, Zulus and other indigenous tribes. The best policy, it was decided, was one of expansion. The Boer Cape Colony, formed after the Dutch ceded Cape Town to the British after the Treaty of 1814, expanded substantially throughout the 1800s. By the 4th of May 1843, the British were able to annex the former Boer Republic of Natal, making it a British colony. In 1867 came a discovery that would change the course of African history forever. By northwest of Cape Town, diamonds were discovered in Kimberley, bringing about a diamond rush that expanded the settlement into a booming town of 50,000 inhabitants within 5 years. The attention of the British was drawn as well. In 1870, the British annexed West Griqualand, where diamonds were first discovered. The isolation that the Boers had enjoyed in the interior of the country had changed forever. The Secretary of State for the colonies at the time was Lord Chelmsford. He looked to the scheme that worked to create a federation such as used in Canada in 1867 and thought it was perfect for organising South Africa. In 1874, he approached the Orange Free State and the Transvaal, both Boer states, with an offer, a federation between the various Boer and British colonies throughout the region. However, the Boers quickly refused the plan. It would have provided a large amount of cheap labour for the British farms, plantation and mines, and had the British white minority ruling over the black majority, an unacceptable position for the Boers. Lord Chelmsford made Sir Bartle Frere the High Commissioner for South Africa in 1877. Frere's job was work towards the federation plan supported by Chelmsford, for which he would be appointed the first British governor of the new dominion. As such, he went into South Africa to deal with the main obstacles to the plan, the Transvaal Republic and the Kingdom of Zululand. His first act as High Commissioner was to exaggerate the incidents against the Zulus in order to build his own case. If you check out episode 1, we discuss the Boer Wars in detail there. Please look in the links in the story notes to find more.
Fire!
The British Secretary for Native Affairs in Natal, Sir Phileas Stepstone, annexed the Transvaal Republic in 1777 using a special warrant. This wasn't pleasing to the Transvaal Boers, but seeing as they were wedged between the British and Zulus, they had very little choice. They feared if they fought the British annexation, King Cetshwayo and the Zulus would take advantage of the opportunity and attack. However, the successive British annexations still created a feeling of unease throughout the Boer Republics. Shepstone was worried about the threat of the Zulu army. They posed a danger to Natal. They had acquired old muskets and other out-of-date firearms and were preparing for what lay ahead. As British Governor of Natal and Administrator of the Transvaal, it was his duty to protect these former Boer lands, and he directly involved himself deeply in the Zulu border dispute. Boer representations and diplomatic manoeuvrings from Paul Kruger continued to build the pressure. Zulu paramilitary actions began to occur on both sides of the Transvaal-Natal border, and Shepstone placed the blame squarely on King Cetshwayo. He described him as being in defiant mood, permitting such outrages to occur. Bishop John William Colenso was advocated for those native Africans in Natal and Zulu who had been treated unfairly by the colonial regime. He found himself one of the few defenders of King Cetshwayo. In 1874, he represented Nangbelewe, the king of Hubi and the Hubi tribes, in representation with Lord Chelmsford. The previous year, Nangbelewe had falsely been accused of rebellion, placed through a charade of a trial and imprisoned on Reuben Island. This defence ended up restraining Colenso from the colonial regime in Natal, as his opposition was not taken well by Shepstone. Colenso championed the cause of the Zulus against the Boer oppression because he was concerned about the amount of misleading information Shepstone was passing to the Colonial Secretary in London. He spoke out against Sir Bartle Frere's claims that the Zulus were a threat. He pointed out the dark racist foundations the colonial regime in Natal was based upon, which led him to being seen as an enemy by the colonists. London did not want a war with the Zulus, and Prime Minister Disraeli's Tory administration was strongly opposed to it. Sir Michael Hicks Beach, who replaced Carnarvon as Secretary of State for the colonies in November 1878, wrote, quote, "Matters in Eastern Europe and India were so serious an aspect that we cannot have a Zulu war in addition to other great and two possible troubles." End quote. However, Sir Bartle Frere had already been in action to this point. His mission was to create a confederation of South African states, and his plan was well underway. He knew the powerful kingdoms of the Zulus were opposed to the plan of the Confederation and was receptive of Shepstone's case that King Cetshwayo's army posed a threat to the peace of the region. Despite the reluctance of the British government, Frere proposed an ultimatum to Cetshwayo in December 1878. He demanded that the Zulu armies be completely disbanded and they accept British residents. Essentially, Cetshwayo would give up his throne and submit to British rule. The Zulus found this entirely unacceptable. The first king of the Zulus was Shaka. Through war and conquest, he built a small tribe into a mighty Zulu kingdom. By 1825, that kingdom encompassed nearly 12,000 square miles. In 1828, Shaka was assassinated by one of his half-brothers in Dunos, and he took over as king. By the 1830s, the Zulus were beginning to get into conflict with the migrating Boers, and Dyangi attempted to take action. However, in 1838 he suffered a crushing defeat by a group of 174 tracker settlers at the Battle of Bruv River. Though his half-brother took 17,000 followers to aid the Boers, Dyangi was assassinated and Mpande took over as king of the Zulu Empire. In 1839, the Boer Republics of Natal was formed by the Boer trackers and under the lead of Pretorius. South of the Tugela and west port of Natal, it was placed directly between Zulu and the British. Mpande and Pretorius kept peaceful relationships. However, in 1842, the British and the Boers went to war, ending with the British annexing the area. Mpande then shifted his alliance to the British, keeping on good peace terms. The next year, Mpande began purging those he perceived as distant from within his kingdom. Many people died and refugees began flooding into neighbouring areas by the thousand, including into British-controlled Natal. Many of them brought their cattle with them, the main measure of wealth in Zululand. Mpande began ordering raids of the surrounding areas up to the full invasion of Swaziland in 1852. However, his British allies were unable to pressure him from withdrawing. At this time, a conflict was breaking out between Mpande's sons, Cetshwayo and Mzozi. The conflict culminated in the Battle of Ndandasky in 1856, which left Cetshwayo the clear heir to the throne. He began slowly to usurp power from his father for the next 20 years, on his way to replacing him as king when Mpande finally died. In 1861, yet another son of Mpande, Umtongo, fled to the Utrecht region. Cetshwayo put together an army and pursued him. The Boers claimed later that Cetshwayo offered the farmers the region of land along the border as long as they surrounded Umtongo. The Boers agreed, given the condition that Umtongo's life be spared, and in 1861 they signed a deal with Mpande to transfer the strip of land running from Rorke's Drift on the Buffalo down to a point on the Pogongla River. The boundary was officially marked off in 1864, but the very next year, Umtongo fled back into Natal. Cetshwayo feared Umtongo's supplanted him, just as Mpande had supplemented Dyangi, and worried that he lost his part of the bargain. Thus he removed the beacon and claimed the land ceded to Lydenburg by the Swazis. They claimed that the Swazis were vassals of the Zulu state and therefore did not have the rights to give up territory. Cetshwayo placed an army under his command, as well as a Boer commando under Paul Kruger at the border to defend it, and quickly took back control of the land north of Pogola. The Zulus also questioned the validity of the documents concerning a strip of land bordered Utrecht. That debate continued through to 1869, when the Lieutenant Governor of Natal, Sir William Keat, came into operation. All attempts to settle these disagreements, however, met with failure. While Cetshwayo did allow certain European missionaries to enter Zululand, he was opposed to their activities and efforts. He did not harm or persecute the missionaries. It was the converts who suffered his wrath, with several of them killed. The missionaries served as a source of hostile reports. While Cetshwayo continued to keep up peaceful relationships with Natal colonists, numerous Zulus of various rival factions began fleeing into Natal and the surrounding areas. These tense relations served as a political background in 1873, when King Mpande died and Cetshwayo assumed his role as leader of the Zulus. Cetshwayo took after his uncle Shaka when it came to leading the Zulus. He attempted to revive the military might of the Zulus as much as possible, including arming his regiments with muskets and other out-of-date firearms. This was quite the upgrade from the standard armament of the Zulu warrior, which consisted of a thrusting spear and a sheer shield made of cowhide. The marksmanship training in the Zulu warriors were poor at best, and both quantity and quality of the powder and shot were lacking. Though the Zulu warriors declined to fire the firearms, the arms, they said, made them cowards. The conflict between the Transvaal and Cetshwayo over the Boer continued unabated. Cetshwayo considered Sir Shepstone his friend and counted on his support during this dispute, but in 1877 that friendship was tested when Cetshwayo took a small force into Transvaal and persuaded the Boers to give up their independence. Shepstone, as the new administrator of Transvaal, then saw the border dispute from the other side. He claimed to have evidence that supported the position of the Boers, but said evidence never surfaced. He attempted to placate the Zulus at the meeting at Blood River in October 1877, but his speeches and promises did not win over the Zulus, who accused him of betraying them. At this point, Shepstone's report back to Carnarvon shifted in tone, painting the Zulus as a threat, an aggressive people challenging the border, instead of the unfavourable opinion he previously expressed. In February 1878, a special commission on the boundary question was formed by Henry Bartle, Lieutenant Governor of Natal. They ended up finding entirely in favour of the Zulus, but this was unacceptable to Henry Bartle Frere, who was still pushing for his federation plan. He characterised the award as, quote, one-sided and unfair to the Boers, end quote, and stated that the Boers living in the land should either be compensated for leaving or protected while staying. Frere had an alternative motive for the meeting on the Boundary Commission report. He planned to use it to deliver an ultimatum to the Zulus, an ultimatum which would allow the British forces under Lord Chelmsford to actively invade Zululand, rather than just stand in defence of a Zulu invasion. The ultimatum centred on 3 incidents which occurred in late July, August and September. These would be Frere's causes belli. Frere knew that no way the king could respond to the ultimatum, giving him the excuse he needed to attack. The first 2 incidents both related to the 2 wives of Shaka Conga fleeing into Natal and the subsequent capture and execution of them. They were described as follows, quote, a wife of the chief Cetshwayo had left and escaped into Natal. She followed on the 28th of July 1878 by a party of Zulus under Meka Zulu, the chief son of Cetshwayo, and his brother seized at the kraal. She had taken refuge and carried back to Zululand, where she was put to death in accordance with Zulu law. A week later, the same young men, with 2 other brothers and an uncle, captured in like manner another refugee wife of Cetshwayo in company of the young man who she had fled. The woman was carried back and is supposed to have been put to death likewise. The young man with her, although guilty in Zulu eyes of a most heinous crime punishable with death, was safe from them on English soil. They did not touch him. End quote. The 3rd incident in September involved 2 men detained on a sandbank of the Gullah River near the Middle Drift. Sir Bartle Frere described the incident to the Secretary of State for the Colonies at that time, Sir Michael Hicks Beach. Quote, Mr. Smith, a surveyor of Colonial Engineer Department, was on duty inspecting a road down the Tol Gullah near Fort Buckingham, which had been made a few years ago. Order of Sir Garnet Wolseley and accompanied by Mr. Dayton, a trader resident of Fort Buckingham, went down to the ford across the Tugela. The stream was very low and ran under the Zulu bank, but they were on the side of it and had not crossed when they were surrounded by a body of 15 to 20 armed Zulus, made prisoner and then taken off their horses. on the Natal side of the river and roughly treated and threatened for some time, though ultimately at the insistence of the head man who came up, they were released and allowed to depart." End quote. These incidents taken in isolation were not enough to justify a full invasion of Zululand. Bulwer viewed these incidents as non-political and did not hold Cetshwayo personally responsible. Quote, "I have sent a message to the Zulu King to inform him of this act of violence and outrage by his subjects in the Natal territory, and to request him to deliver up to this government to be tried for their offences under the laws of the colony, the persons of Mxulula and Bekazula, the two sons of Cetshwayo, who were the leaders of the party." End quote. Cetshwayo's response also treated the issue rather lightly. Quote, "Cetshwayo is sorry to acknowledge that the message brought by Umlugu is true, but he begs His Excellency will not take it in the light he sees the Natal government to see as what Cetshwayo's sons did not. He can only attribute to a rash act of boys who in the zeal of their father's house did not think of what they were doing. Cetshwayo acknowledges that they deserve punishing, and he sends some of his Nduzuna who will follow Ulumungi with these words. Cetshwayo states that no act of his subjects will make his quarrel with his fathers of the sons of Shaka." End quote. The Lieutenant Governor's initial complaint was put in form of a request for Cetshwayo to surrender the culprits involved. However, Sir Bartle Frere upped the ante, transforming it into demand. He wrote to Hicks Beach on the 30th of September 1878 saying, quote, "Apart from whatever may be the general wish of the Zulu Nation, it seems to me that the seizure of these two refugee women in British territory by an armed force crossing an unmistakable and well-known boundary line and carrying them off and merging them with contemporaneous disregard for the remonstrations of the Natal policemen, it itself an insult and violation of British territory which cannot be passed over unless apologised in a tone before compliance with the Lieutenant Governor's demands that the leaders of the murderous gangs shall be given up to Dutch justice. It is necessary to send to the Zulu King an ultimatum which put an end to the pacific relations with our neighbours." End quote. Hicks Beach replied at least 3 times on the 17th of October, 21st of October and 18th of December, explicitly stating there was no invasion of Zululand. War was to be avoided. In their 21st November dispatch they stated, quote, "Her Majesty's Government has arrived. It is her duty to impress upon you that in supplying these reinforcements it is desired of Her Majesty's Government not to furnish means for a campaign of invasion and conquest, but to afford such protection as may be necessary at this conjunction to the lives and property of the colonists. Though the present aspect of the affairs is menacing in a high degree, I can by no means arrive at the conclusion that war with the Zulus would be unavoidable, and I am confident you, in concert with Sir H. Bulwer, will use every effort to overcome the existing difficulties by judgment and forbearance, and to avoid an evil such as a deprecated new Zulu War." End quote. Frere and Sir Henry Ernest Gascoigne Bulwer had several discussions and eventually decided to set a meeting with Zulu representatives. The meeting was supposed to be the occasion on which the findings of the Boundary Commission could be expressed to the Zulu people. However, they also used it to present the King an ultimatum. By this time, they were able to include further incidents into their justification. It was no longer merely the case of Cetshwayo's sons or Smith and Dayton. Cetshwayo had apparently broken several promises to Shepstone at his coronation in 1872. In fact, that ceremony had run only to satisfy Shepstone and was in no way binding, and Cetshwayo had actually become king several weeks earlier simply by his application by his Isandlwana. The ultimatum also included surrender of Mbeleni Cetshwayo, the son of Swazi king, who was unsuccessful in uprising in his brother's claim to the throne. Exile, he took refuge in western Zululand near Ntumbi River with permission from Cetshwayo, who possibly regarded him as a buffer zone between him and the Boers of the Transvaal. Mbele made raids on anyone in that area for their cattle and prisoners, no matter if they were Boer or Zulu. Thus, Britain had to deal with him once they took over administration of Transvaal. Frere thought that the Zulu king was paying Mbele to cause problems and thus demanded his surrender as well. Sir Henry Bartle wrote, quote, "The king disowned Mbele's act by saying that Mbeleni had been given him trouble, that he'd been left the Zulu country in order to wrest the Zwazi chieftainship from his brother, the reigning chief, and that it was returned to him should kill him. But there's nothing to show that it is any way punished him, or on the contrary, it's quite certain that even if Mbele did not act with the express orders of Cetshwayo, he did so with the knowledge that he would be agreeable to the king." End quote. It took a long time for information to get to South Africa and London and back again, and it took advantage of it. Intentions from London or holding back vital information until it was too late for London to act in other ways. There was no mention to the British government of the demands until a letter written on the 14th of October 1878 finally arrived on the 16th of November, and by then messages had already been dispatched and the entire process begun. A telegraph sent off the moment they received the letter may have prevented the ultimatum, but there was nothing to indicate the urgency of the situation. Nowhere in the letter was anything suggesting how soon Frere would act or how stringent his demands would be. In January 1879, Hicks Beach wrote to Bartle Frere, quote, "I may observe that the communications which had previously been received from you had not entirely prepared them for the course which you deem necessary to take. The representations made by Lord Chelmsford and yourself last autumn at the urgent need of strengthening Her Majesty's forces in South Africa was based upon the imminent danger of an invasion of Natal by the Zulus and the inadequate means at the time of your disposal for meeting it. In order to afford protection to the lives and properties of the colonialists, the reinforcements asked for were supplied, and in informing your decision of Her Majesty's government, I take the opportunity to impress upon you the importance of using every effort to avoid war. By the terms which you have dictated to the Zulu King, however, necessary to relieve the colony in future from impending increasing danger are evident, such as may not improbably refuse even at the risk of war, and I regret necessity for immediate action should it be prepared to you in imperative as a prelude from incurring delay which been involved in consultating Her Majesty's government upon a subject of such importance as the terms which Cetshwayo should be required to accept before the terms are actually presented to the Zulu King." End quote. I had on previous occasion complained it was helpless to impact Frere's actions. This was a note that he gave to the Prime Minister, quote, "I have impressed this view upon Sir B. Frere both officially and privately to the best of my power. I cannot really control him without telegraph, as I feel as likely as not that he is at war with the Zulus at present moment." End quote. It seemed Frere was determined to start a conflict with the Zulus, and he succeeded. Cetshwayo did not respond to the demands, on the 11th of January 1879, Bartle Frere declared that they were in a state of war. The British forces there to defend Natal had already been deployed, and on that day they crossed the border and invaded Zululand. The ultimatum was delivered to King Cetshwayo on the 11th of December 1878. There were 13 different items listed with varying time limits. The first 3 items had a deadline of the 31st of December, with an extra 10 days added on for the remaining items on the agenda. All these deadlines were later expanded until the 10th of January, and when they were not accomplished, Bartle Frere declared war. The items on the ultimatum were as follows: surrender Shiera's 3 sons and brother to be tried by the Natal courts, payment of a fine of 500 head of cattle for the outrages committed by the above and for Cetshwayo's delay in complying with the request of the Natalan government for the surrender of the offenders, payment of 100 head of cattle for the offence committed by Messrs Smith and Dayton, surrender of the Swazi chief and Berlin, others to be named hereafter and to be tried by the Transvaal courts. Observance of the coronation promises that the Zulu army be disbanded and men allowed to go home, that the Zulu military system will be discontinued and other military regulations adopted to be decided upon after consultation with the Great Council and British representatives, that every man who comes to a man's estate shall be free to marry. All missionaries and their converts who until 1877 lived in Zululand shall be allowed to return and reoccupy their stations. All such missionaries shall be allowed to teach, and any Zulu who chooses shall be free to listen to their teachings. A British agent shall be allowed to reside in Zululand, who will see that the above provisions are carried out. All disputes in which missionary or Europeans are concerned shall be heard by the King in public and in the presence of the resident. No sentence of expulsion from Zululand shall be carried out until it has been approved by the resident. Cetshwayo did not attempt to avoid war with the British, or at least dull its eventual scope. His troops were given specific orders only to defend their country and not to take the fight into British territories. Only soldiers in uniform were be allowed to be killed, as well as no collateral damage was deemed acceptable. The British invasion. Sound effect. The borders disputes between the Zulu and Boers served as the pretext for war. When Cetshwayo gave no response to Bartle Frere by the 11th of January 1879, a British force led by Sir General Frederick Augusta Tesiga, 2nd Baron Chelmsford, invaded Zululand on Bartle Frere's authority without authorization from the British government. The Commander-in-Chief of the British forces during the war would be Lord Chelmsford. His initial plans involved a five-pronged invasion of Zululand, with over 15,000 troops designed to force the Zulu army into confrontation by circling them. They were concerned the Zulus were going to attempt to avoid a full-on battle. However, when it came to the actual invasion, Lord Chelmsford decided to reduce the number of forces to 3, a large centre force under his direct command and 2 columns flanking on either side. On the 11th of January they crossed the Buffalo River into Zululand. The 3 columns were invaded from the lower Tulega, Rorke's Drift and Utrecht. Their objective, however, were the same: Ulundi, the Zulu capital. Cetshwayo's army outnumbered the British. It's true, but it wasn't a strict numerical advantage. The army numbered around 35,000 men, but it was essentially a militia force called out when there was a national danger. It could only be activated for a few weeks at a time, but before then they were forced to return to their civilian duties. They were primarily armed with essentially thrusting spears known as ikwe, clubs and throwing spears and shields made out of cowhide, hardly a match for the trained and equipped British soldiers. All 3 British columns were first unopposed. By the 22nd of January, Lord Chelmsford's centre column was camped near Isandlwana. That morning he split his forces. Some he sent out on recognition mission, leaving the camp in charge of his subordinate, Colonel Pauline. Waiting for them at the Zulu army was nearly 20,000 soldiers, led by Cozy. Divisional force led by Chelmsford eastward, while the main force attacked the camp. Chelmsford had not set up a camp defensively before leaving, ignoring both British policy and information that the Zulus were nearby. This decision directly led to the greatest victory of the Zulu Kingdom to achieve during the war, the Battle of Isandlwana. The British forces were entirely wrecked by the surprise attack. Its camp was destroyed with heavy casualties and the loss of supplies, ammunition and means of transportation. It took 10 hours of ferocious fighting to even secure the border post at Rorke's Drift after some Zulu reserves mounted an unauthorised raid. Chelmsford had no choice, he had to retreat back to British soil. The right flank by comparison was having more success. Colonel Charles Pearson crossed the Tugela River and managed to break up a Zulu impi that was attempting to set up an ambush. Pearson managed to advance as far as Esho and a deserted missionary station, which he set up about fortifying. However, upon learning of the destruction of Isandlwana, he made plans to retreat back to British territory, but the Zulu army cut off his supply lines and began besieging his position. The left flank under Colonel Evelyn Wood had the task of occupying the northwest forces of Zululand, preventing them from engaging the central column. They had set up camp at Sintan's Kraal and were planned to attack a force of 4,000 Zulus on the 24th of January, but again, once the news of Isandlwana reached them, they decided to withdraw. In only 1 month, and only one of the 3 flanks of the British army effective, and too small to mount any campaign by itself, the first invasion of Zululand had been a complete failure. Cetshwayo did not press his advantage, and it was never his intention to invade Natal, only to defend the border boundaries of Zululand. That gave Chelmsford 2 months. 2 months he used to rebuild his forces. Using the excuse of Pearson's being sieged at Esho, he received 7 regiments of reinforcements as well as 2 artillery batteries from the British government. They arrived on the 7th of March, and by the 29th, Lord Chelmsford was marching to Esho's relief with more than 5,000 soldiers in his command, this time setting up entrenched camps upon the way. Sir Evelyn Wood was ordered to take his troops and attack Abishkwali Zulu at their stronghold in Holban. That didn't go as well as planned, however. The Zulu main army, numbering 20,000 strong, approached to add support. The British was forced to retreat, chased by 1,000 Zulus of the Kabasushi, ranking at 225 casualties on the way. The next day, Wood was attacked by 20,000 Zulu warriors, outnumbering by almost 10 to 1 at their camp at Kambala. The attack was apparently issued without Cetshwayo's permission and was a failure. The Battle of Kambala lasted 5 hours with over 1,000 Zulus killed, and only British losses were 80. While Woods was fighting that force, Chelmsford continued his march against Eshowe, repelling soldiers along the way. They relieved Pearson's besieged men on the 3rd of April, and 2 days later they evacuated the fort, after which the Zulus burnt it to the ground. Despite their rescue of the force at Eshowe and their success at Kambala and Gindaruvu, the British were back where they started. Nevertheless, there was a pressing reason for Chelmsford to continue pressing his attack. He was being replaced and he wanted to inflict a decisive defeat on Cetshwayo before that. With reinforcements amounted to 16,000 British and 7,000 African troops, he reorganised and recognised once more, and in June began advancing into Zululand, this time being extremely careful, building fortified camps every step of the way. Cetshwayo attempted to negotiate a peace treaty at this point. The reinforced British were being a formidable opponent, and while the advantage was even, he attempted to end the fighting. Chelmsford, however, was eager to restore his reputation before being relieved. Thus, on the 4th of July, the force met at the Rorke Ulundi, and Cetshwayo was delivered a decisive defeat. After the battle, the Zulu army dispersed. Most of the remaining chiefs submitted to British forces. Cetshwayo himself became a fugitive. Chelmsford's work was done. He was replaced by Sir Garnet Wolseley for the final operations. On the 28th of August, the king was captured and sent to Cape Town, where he was formally deposed. Wolseley quickly discarded Bartle Frere's confederation scheme. His idea was to divide Zululand into 13 separate chiefdoms, headed by chiefs loyal to the British Empire. This, the Zulus were being able to unite as one unit under a single king, ensuring internal divisions and civil wars. Thus Shaka's dynasty was finally ended and the Zulu country divided and proportioned out. Chelmsford received a Knight Grand Order Cross of Bath, largely because of his capture of Lundy. However, he never would serve in the field again after criticism of his handling of the situation. Bartle Frere was left with a minor post in Cape Town. Bishop Colenso interfered with the British government on behalf of Cetshwayo and succeeded in having him released from captivity on Reuben Island and returned to Zululand in 1883. The eventual communication between the new tribal chiefs and the British government ended up causing a great deal of bloodshed and disturbance. In 1882, the British government decided the best move would be to restore Cetshwayo to the throne. Unfortunately, in the meantime, blood feuds had risen among the chiefs. One side supported the chiefs of Isandlwana and Mani, and the other side supporting the former king. When Cetshwayo was restored to power, Ushipu kept his territory, but additional land bordering Natal ended up becoming a reserve, a place for Zulu unwilling to serve the restored king. This new agreement ended up providing futile gain, and Ushipu and Cetshwayo soon ended up fighting another. Ushipu was victorious on the 22nd of July 1883, sending Cetshwayo out of power for good. Again, more sound effects, and then the end. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this podcast. As ever, we rely on the generosity of our readers and listeners. Please share with your friends and family. Use your social media sites to talk about the podcast. Please leave comments, and if you would like me to talk about any other wars or histories, then please contact us. Look at the show notes for further details. Thank you.
The Starlight Lounge presents An Evening with the Progressive Box.
Oh, what a great audience. Let's dim the lights for this next one. Nope, too much. There it is. Gotta get things just right. Like Progressive's Name Your Price tool. Tell us what you want to pay, and we help you find coverage options that fit your budget. And now, the mood is right. Wait, the lights are back on again. Trudy, can you? And now it's completely dark.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.